Tell me you did not glue it shut. The woman in the navy suit didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The folder in front of her was open, the photos were clipped in neat rows, and my husband was standing against the far wall looking like a man who had just watched his life split cleanly down the middle. On the table between us sat a cheap drugstore eyeliner tube in an evidence bag, black plastic, silver cap, the kind of thing you could buy for $3.99 under fluorescent lights while picking up toothpaste. I stared at it, then at him. I found another woman's makeup in my husband's duffel bag, I said. So yes, I glued it shut. The agent closed the folder. Mrs. Sloan, she said. That eyeliner was carrying an encrypted ceramic shard linked to a live federal smuggling case. The courier detected the tamper. 18 months of surveillance disappeared in under 40 minutes. My mouth went dry. My husband finally looked at me. Lena, he said softly, I can explain. That was the exact second I understood explanation was not going to save either of us. If you've ever acted on one furious assumption and blown your whole life open, stay with me and tell me in the comments when your gut was right, or disastrously wrong. My name is Lena Torres Sloan, and until that Thursday I thought my marriage was failing in one ordinary humiliating way. Another woman, a secret, a lie small enough to fit in a pocket and ugly enough to rot a house from the inside. I had no idea the lie was older than our marriage, older than the townhouse we bought in street. Louis, older than the vows, older even than the version of my mother I had spent 22 years grieving. The beginning, if I am honest, was not glamorous. No lipstick on a collar, no midnight whisper I could hear through a door, no perfume that wasn't mine. It was laundry. Evan had come home late again, kissed my forehead, apologized in that smooth, exhausted voice of his, and dropped his overnight duffel just inside the mudroom before heading upstairs to shower. He said he had been in Jefferson City on a procurement review. He worked, supposedly, as a compliance attorney for a private infrastructure consortium that did state contract audits. The job was boring enough on paper that nobody ever asked a second question. I certainly hadn't. I was a trauma nurse at Mercy West, after 12-hour shifts full of blood alarms, ruptured families, and people learning in one sentence that life was never going back to what it had been that morning. Boring legal work sounded like a gift. I loved him partly because he seemed steady in a world that never was. Evan was thoughtful without being showy, funny without trying, the sort of man who remembered my coffee order, my shoe size, the songs I skipped when I was in a bad mood, the exact way I liked the lamp angled on the couch when I read after a shift. He cooked on Sundays, he folded towels with absurd precision, he could make a room feel less sharp just by standing in it, which is why the changes took me so long to name. The second phone he said was, for contract clients, the calls he took outside even in January, the way he started locking his office door when he never had before, the unfamiliar tension in his shoulders when I mentioned my last name around strangers, as if Torres landed somewhere inside him with more weight than it should have. The nights he came home smelling not like perfume, not like alcohol, but like cold air and parking garages, and places people don't linger unless they are waiting for something. I filed all of it under work stress because that is what trust looks like when it wants to survive. Trust is not only belief, sometimes it is deliberate blindness in nice clothes. That Thursday I was off shift, tired enough to feel brittle, sorting lights and darks with a podcast murmuring in the background. His duffel was half unzipped. I reached in for his dress shirts, and my fingers brushed a narrow hard tube tucked into the side pocket. Matte black, silver band, tiny printed letters. Velvet line precision eyeliner, midnight ash. I knew immediately it wasn't mine. I don't wear liquid liner, never learned, never cared. My cosmetic bag is full of chapstick, tinted sunscreen, and the same mascara brand I've used since nursing school because I buy it in bulk and refuse to be emotionally manipulated by beauty marketing. I stood there holding that tube while the dryer buzzed and the shower ran overhead. I remember ridiculous details. A sock caught on the laundry basket handle. Rain tapping lightly at the kitchen windows. The smell of detergent and tomato basil from the sauce I had started for dinner. My hand actually shaking once, just once, before it went still. There are moments when your mind gives you two doors. One says calm down, ask first, maybe there's an explanation. The other says don't be stupid, you are looking straight at the explanation. I chose the second door so fast I could pretend I had never seen the first. I put the eyeliner back. I walked to the junk drawer, moved aside old batteries, rubber bands, a birthday candle, and found the superglue pen I used last month to fix a cracked picture frame. I unscrewed the cap, squeezed a thin ring of glue under the silver seam, twisted it tight again, wiped the excess with a paper towel, and returned it to the pocket exactly where I had found it. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying? For about 7 seconds. Then he came downstairs in a gray t-shirt, damp-haired, beautiful, asking whether I wanted garlic bread with dinner, and I had to stand there with my own heartbeat crashing in my ears, while the man I thought might be cheating on me looked at me with the same open face he had worn when he proposed under the floodlit winter trees in Forest Park. I said yes to the garlic bread. I made pasta. I laughed at one joke. I went to bed next to him and did not sleep for more than 20 minutes at a time. The next day he was normal. That was somehow worse. He kissed me goodbye before dawn. He texted around lunch. Long meeting. Don't wait for me. He sent a photo at 4:12 of a sad airport sandwich and a caption about corporate cruelty. He came home at 9, tired, apologetic, and warm. If he had opened that tube somewhere, he gave no sign. If he had met whoever owned it, he never mentioned her. He rubbed my feet while we watched a true crime documentary and fell asleep with his hand over my ankle like a man with nothing to hide. By Saturday morning I was starting to hate myself more than him. Maybe I had misread it. Maybe it was a sample for some cousin. Maybe he was carrying it for a witness in one of those weird legal errands people in big offices somehow wound up doing. Maybe I was the kind of suspicious wife I used to pity when patients' husbands stared at the floor and said, "She always gets like this." Saturday at 2:17 p.m., 3 federal agents walked into the trauma wing asking for me by my married name. One was a woman with a severe bun and a face trained to give difficult facts without wasting a single extra syllable. One was a younger man with a tablet and restless eyes. The third was Evan, not in a suit. In a charcoal field jacket, dark jeans, no wedding ring, expression carved down to something harder and older than the face I knew. "Lena," he said. My charge nurse, Monique, looked from him to me and back again. The exact expression of a woman deciding whether to call security or popcorn. "Should I clear this room?" she asked. The woman flashed credentials so quickly I barely caught the seal. "Yes," she said. 5 minutes later I was sitting in a consultation room usually reserved for families about to hear the worst thing of their lives, and a federal agent named Tessa Grier was telling me that the eyeliner in evidence bag number 7B-144 had been part of an ongoing Homeland Security investigations operation targeting an interstate technology smuggling network. I said very clearly, "That is not possible." Then Evan said, "My name is not Evan Sloan with them, it's Daniel Vale." That was the first fracture, not the deepest, just the first. He said he was an HSI special agent. He said the legal consortium was a cover legend. He said the eyeliner tube contained a ceramic microshard etched with layered access credentials stolen from a subcontractor tied to drone navigation systems. He said the tube had been planted in his duffel during a controlled pass by a courier named Mara Quill, and that he had been tracking the handoff chain for 5 months. He said my superglue had altered the cap tension by less than a gram, but Mara Quill noticed anomalies for a living. She checked the tube, saw the tamper, aborted the contact, burned her route, and vanished. He said all of this like someone carrying a stretcher downstairs, carefully, evenly, never once looking away from the fact that one wrong shift would drop the whole weight. I asked one question. "How long?" He knew what I meant. "Since before we met," he said. The room got smaller. My ears rang so hard I almost missed the rest. Tessa Grier was explaining legal exposure. They were not charging me. They believed the tampering was domestic, emotional, non-malicious. That phrase almost made me laugh. Domestic, emotional, non-malicious. As if a marriage could be reduced to a line item in a federal summary. "What exactly did you tell me that was true?" I asked him. His jaw moved once. "Everything about us was true." "Don't do that," I said. He took one step closer. Tessa stopped him with a glance. "Lena," he said, voice low. "I lied about my job. I lied about why I came into your life. I did not lie about loving you." That sentence would have been insulting if it hadn't sounded so raw. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to ask why my husband suddenly had a different name. I wanted to demand whether our wedding photos were filed somewhere as operational documentation. I wanted to split his face open with one of the metal chairs and then put pressure on the wound myself because apparently that is who I am. Instead I stared at the eyeliner tube. "Why me?" I asked. Silence. That was when I knew the real story had not started yet. Tessa shut the folder. "We're relocating you tonight." I looked up. "Excuse me?" The network knows Agent Vale's cover channel was compromised. We have reason to believe anyone in his immediate orbit may now be of interest. Because of a tube of eyeliner? "Because of your name," she said. That landed with a different weight. Torres. My mother's name. My mother, Isabel Torres, had died in a warehouse fire outside Laredo when I was 12. At least that was the story. Cargo blaze, faulty wiring, closed casket, half the neighborhood brought casseroles. I spent the next decade thinking grief was a room you just learned to walk around in. Tessa was already watching my face. "What about my name?" I said. She answered too carefully. "That conversation happened somewhere secure." I should have refused. I should have walked out, called a lawyer, called my father's sister in Tulsa, called anyone outside that room and made the world prove itself before I stepped any deeper into it. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Can I at least finish my shift?" Monique from the doorway said, "Absolutely not." That is how, 4 hours later, I ended up in the back of an unmarked SUV leaving the city I thought I knew while my husband Daniel, Evan, whichever name belonged to whatever version of him was left, sat across from me in silence and rain streaked the windows, like the whole world was trying to blur itself beyond recognition. They took me to a federal building downtown first, then through 2 badge checks and 1 windowless corridor into a conference room so ordinary it was almost insulting. Beige walls, bottled water, generic art that looked selected by committee. The kind of room where governments explain the end of your old life in a voice designed not to stain the carpet. The analyst was already there. Danny Park. Early 30s. Sharp black blazer, sharper eyes, the composure of a person who had long ago accepted that other people's secrets would eventually become her paperwork. She had a tablet, a slim file, and the terrible kindness of someone who knows she is about to alter your understanding of yourself. She said, "Mrs. Slowing. Don't call me that right now." She nodded once. "Lena." Then she slid a photo across the table. It was my mother, older, alive, standing outside a marina office in Galveston wearing a cream coat and sunglasses, and the exact half-smile I had inherited and hated on myself. I didn't touch the photo. I think part of me believed touching it would make it less deniable, like fingerprints on reality. "That's fake," I said. Danny didn't insult me by pretending she didn't understand why I said it. "We verified through 3 independent channels," she replied. "Your mother did not die in 2002. She staged her death with the help of a logistics cell that later evolved into the network we've been investigating." My throat closed. Daniel finally spoke. "Lena." I turned on him so fast he stopped. "You knew." "Not a question." "Yes." "How long?" "A beat. Since before I met you." The second fracture went deeper than the first. Donnie kept going because some truths, once opened, do not pause for your feelings. Isabel Torres, she said, had resurfaced years later under multiple aliases. She was believed to be one of the financial architects behind a distributed smuggling operation that moved prototype materials, routing codes, and contract-level access credentials through ordinary consumer goods. Cosmetics, supplements, travel toiletries. Cheap, forgettable things nobody looked at twice. The network called its unseen top coordinator La Viuda, the widow. My mother. "No," I said again, but now it sounded smaller, thinner, more like a child's word than a woman's. Danny turned the tablet so I could see a timeline. Dates, ports, shell companies, storage leases, warehouse acquisitions. One highlighted entry from 6 years earlier circled in yellow, St. Louis, Subject Proximity Initiative. I looked at Daniel. His face had gone pale in a way I had never seen. Danny said it for him. "Agent Vale was originally assigned to assess whether you had knowledge of a hidden ledger tied to your mother's logistics chain." I laughed. Once. It sounded sick. There it was. The third fracture. Not a random love story. Not fate. Not even a man lying because he was doing difficult patriotic work. At the start, I had been a target. An assignment. A file. A path. "Get out," I told him. Tessa Greer, leaning by the door, shifted. "Lena." "Not you," I said. "Him." Daniel did not move. "Get out before I make this uglier than your agency can redact." For 1 second, I thought he might argue. Then he nodded, once, and left the room with the stunned restraint of a man choosing obedience only because it is the last thing he has left to offer. After he was gone, I finally picked up the photo. My hand shook so badly the corner clicked against the table. I stared at Isabel Torres, my mother, not dead, not burned, not gone, just elsewhere, apparently alive enough to choose every single day not to come back for me. The betrayal did not land all at once. It came in layers, first disbelief, then humiliation, then a cold, humiliating arithmetic. Every birthday after 12, every graduation, every apartment lease, Every Christmas, I told myself grief was cleaner than abandonment because at least death had not been a choice. She had chosen. Over and over, Danny let me sit with that for maybe 30 seconds, which in that room felt merciful. Then she said, "There's more." Of course there was. 3 years before I became a nurse, while I was finishing prereqs and working nights at a records facility near the river, a locked archive drawer assigned to decommissioned customs files had been accessed under a temporary supervisor code. A manifest went missing. Not a paper manifest, an embedded ceramic key disguised inside a seal tab from a crate inspection packet. The key was believed to map a dormant storage network created by Isabel Torres before she vanished from active operations. The network believed my mother had hidden that route key where only someone with a family connection could recover it. The government believed she had either passed it to me without my knowledge or left clues in places only I would notice. "That's insane," I said. "Yes," Danny said. "But criminals and governments alike have spent years making major decisions based on that possibility." "And what did he report?" I asked, still looking at the photo. "Your agent, my husband. What did he tell you after he got close enough to decide whether I was useful?" Danny was silent. That silence answered me before she did. "He filed inconclusive assessment reports," she said finally. Then he stopped pushing for escalation. That made me look up. "Stopped why?" Danny's expression changed by half an inch. "Enough. Because by then," she said, "he was no longer making purely professional choices." I should have hated that sentence. In a way, I did. But it slid into the room beside every other wound instead of healing any of them. Tessa put witness relocation options on the table. Safe apartment, restricted contact, monitored phone access. Until they knew whether Mara Quill had passed my name upward, I was a vulnerability. I asked for 1 hour alone. They gave me 40 minutes and left a bottle of water I never opened. When Daniel came back in, he looked less like an agent than a man approaching a live wire he believed he deserved to touch. I said, "Start at the beginning, and this time don't insult me with edited truth." He sat across from me and told me about a professional conference in Chicago 6 years earlier. One I remembered because the coffee was terrible and I had mocked a panelist's slide deck under my breath to the stranger beside me. Him. He had been sent because my registration flagged a name match and a geographic overlap with one of Isabel Torres's deadroot holdings. His job was to make contact, assess, and, if possible, identify whether I knew anything about a hidden ceramic key tied to my mother's last known logistics schema. "At first," he said, and his voice nearly failed on the words, "I was supposed to get close, report, and move on." "At first," I repeated. That phrase is doing a lot of work. "I know. Did you ever intend not to marry me?" He closed his eyes for 1 second. "After the first month, no." I wanted to call that absurd, manipulative, convenient, but he looked destroyed enough that truth had a strange, ugly shine to it. He told me he never found evidence I knew anything. He told me he buried leads that would have drawn harsher scrutiny onto me. He told me he transferred portions of the case twice to keep analysts from making me primary. He told me the agency tolerated his continued position because he was productive, because proximity still had value, because bureaucracy will excuse almost anything as long as the reports look useful, and because they thought maybe eventually I'd unknowingly lead you to what my mother left behind. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I stood and walked to the far wall because if I stayed seated, I might put my hands through the table. I said, "Was our wedding operationally approved?" He took longer to answer than he should have. That told me yes before the word came. I laughed again, and this time even I hated the sound. "Wow. Lena. Don't." I turned back. "Do not say my name like you still own the soft version of it." He took that without defense. "I never owned anything," he said quietly. "That was the problem. I built a life with you while knowing some part of it had started under false reasons, and every year I waited longer to tell you because every year the truth got heavier." "Truth doesn't get heavier," I snapped. "Cowardice does." That one hit. I watched it land. Good. I wanted him bleeding, even metaphorically. But then he said, "Your mother contacted the network again 9 months ago," and the whole room tilted in a new direction. That was the first time I heard about the message. A dormant storage route had reactivated under a shell freight company in Cape Girardeau. One encoded note, intercepted by a customs partner, contained a phrase only linked historically to Isabel's early methods: "Daughters inherit what fire cannot keep." Not poetic, not random. Specific enough that 3 agencies immediately reopened the assumption that I was still the endpoint. "I didn't tell you because once your name came back into active traffic, the safest thing for you was ignorance." I stared at him. You don't get to use safety as a clean word anymore. His face changed in a way that told me he agreed. By midnight, I had learned my husband's real first name, my mother's criminal alias, the existence of a phantom key I did not remember ever seeing, and the fact that my entire adult love story had been built on a professional lie that later mutated into something apparently real enough to ruin him. They moved me that night to a furnished townhouse outside the city. White walls, cheap art. A refrigerator stocked by someone who thought people under emotional collapse crave Greek yogurt and apples. A marshal sat in a sedan across the street. My phone was replaced. My schedule vanished. My life reduced to monitored calls, heavily redacted answers, and the metallic taste of unspent rage. I did not cry the first night. I did not cry the second either. On the third morning, I found myself staring at a packet of hotel coffee and suddenly weeping so hard I had to crouch on the kitchen tile because grief, it turns out, is petty about its entrances. It does not arrive for the monumental reveal. It arrives for the mug he would have warmed for me before pouring. That afternoon Danny Park came alone. She brought files, Thai takeout, and the sort of practical calm that made me dislike her less than I wanted to. She spread printouts across the table, freight records, shell company chains, rental units, cosmetic distributors, import routes running through Memphis, Little Rock, Tulsa, then looping back through minor ports nobody glamorous ever films. Your mother built redundancies, Danny said. She moved data the way other people move jewelry through customs, broken apart, disguised, boring. And you think she left something for me? We think she may have left something around you. That wording mattered. Around me, not with me, not to me, around me. Danny slid a photo forward. It was of the old records facility by the river where I had worked nights at 19, a cinder block building with failing HVAC and a supervisor who smelled like stale mints. I had spent months logging boxes from customs archive overflows. Boring work, easy work. Work nobody notices until 5 agencies start reconstructing one missing hour from 17 years ago. Walk me through your last week there, Danny said. I almost laughed. That was half my life ago. Today. So I did. Broken bits. A burst pipe in the loading bay. An audit. A storage reshuffle. A drawer jammed shut. A woman asking for a restroom who was not on staff. Dark glasses, blue scarf, impatient. I froze. Blue scarf. My mother had a blue silk scarf with tiny white cranes stitched into one corner. She wore it to church, to parent meetings, to the grocery store in winter because she said pretty things should not wait for special occasions. I had not remembered that woman in years because at the time she had barely registered. Adults move through your peripheral vision when you are 19 and tired and trying to earn rent money. You don't expect one of them to be your dead mother standing 20 feet away while you alphabetize decommissioned seizures. Danny saw it on my face. Tell me. I told her. The woman, the scarf, the way she never removed the glasses, the $10 bill she pressed into my hand when I gave her directions because the vending machine near the restroom only took cash. My irritation. My decision to keep the money because I was broke. I stood abruptly and went to my bag. I still had the bill. Not physically, the bill was long gone, but I had kept the envelope I hid it in for years because on the back of it I had scribbled something odd from that shift. A locker number, 214C. I had written it because the woman in the blue scarf had glanced toward the staff lockers right before leaving, and something about the glance had bothered me enough that I scribbled it as a joke to myself. Nurse brain before nursing. I had always written down the odd details. The envelope was in a memory box at the townhouse because the marshals had grabbed a duffel from our house and, without knowing, packed parts of my life at random. I found the box under spare blankets. Birthday cards. My old student ID. A dried movie stub. And there, folded into a book of anatomy flashcards, the cream envelope with my 19-year-old handwriting on the back, 214, C, blue scarf lady weird. Danny took the envelope like it might pulse. Where were the lockers? Basement corridor behind records. Who used 214, C? I looked at the old memory, foggy, and then suddenly sharp. Nobody permanent, overflow staff, temp assignments, contractors. Donnie was already on her phone. The locker no longer existed. The building had been renovated twice, but the basement wall behind the former locker bank had. Ground-penetrating scan, demolition permit access. 2 hours of dust later, they found a sealed electrical junction cavity behind the exact space where 214C had once stood. Inside it was a ceramic wafer wrapped in wax paper and a note in my mother's handwriting. Not to me. For me, there is a difference, and it hurt like one. The note contained 6 lines. No apology, no explanation, only instructions written in the clipped practical style I remembered from the grocery lists she used to tape to the fridge. When the fire is mentioned, say you never smelled smoke. Trust the one who stayed. Quill will reach first, not last. The marina is memory, not water. Do not let her see you afraid. If I failed you, end this. I read it twice, then a third time. Trust the one who stayed. I looked up at Danny. She meant Daniel. Probably. That probably was doing a lot of work. The ceramic wafer, once decoded, did not contain account numbers or a master list like everybody hoped. My mother had been too careful for that. It contained root authentication fragments and one active contingency phrase linked to a dormant meat protocol in Memphis. Enough to bait someone high enough in the network to believe the missing chain had finally resurfaced through me. Tessa Greer wanted to move immediately. Daniel argued they should shut me down, keep me in protective hold, and use only digital simulation. For the first time since all of this started, I was the one who cut through the room. No, I said. You dragged my life into daylight. You told me my mother used me as insurance and my husband used me as an assignment. We are not doing one more thing around me without me. Tessa studied me with the kind of respect that arrives only after someone stops being paperwork and becomes operationally inconvenient in a useful way. It would be dangerous. I looked at the note again. If I failed you, end this. I said, good. The plan took 8 days. That is how long it took to turn a trauma nurse into credible bait for a smuggling network that had spent years mythologizing her as the daughter of its missing architect. I learned routes, phrases, countersigns. I learned how to walk without scanning corners too obviously, how to keep my voice level while lying, how to recognize when a parked car had 2 people in front and one pretending not to exist in back. I learned the exact details of the fake story we would use. That I had found the wafer in an old memory box after my husband's betrayal, that I wanted out, that I believed my mother had hidden money tied to it, that I would trade location for protection. I also learned Daniel made coffee exactly the same in safe houses as he did at home, which felt obscene. We were not allowed to discuss our marriage unless it affected the op. That rule lasted maybe a day. On the second training night he found me in the garage workspace staring at the note. You should sleep, he said. I used to think you hated clutter, I said, not looking up. He waited. In our house, I went on. Every counter clean. Every drawer labeled. I thought it was just you being impossible. Now I think it was because you needed exits clear. He leaned against the workbench. Both can be true. There he was. The dry humor. The man I loved folded disastrously inside the man who lied to me. I hated that they still shared a face. Did you ever tell yourself you were protecting me? I asked, when really you were protecting your position in my life? He took that like he deserved it. Yes. The honesty hit harder than defense would have. And now? Now I'm trying to protect your right to hate me without getting killed in the process. That line stayed with me, not because it redeemed him, because it didn't try to. By day 5, Mara Quill surfaced exactly where my mother's note said she would, first, not last. She sent a signal through a vintage consignment shop in Memphis, hiding a contact prompt in the return tag of a silk Marina blouse delivered to the front counter under one of our monitoring names. Marina is memory, not water. The note clicked into place. Not an actual marina, a shop called Marina Blue in a strip half the city had forgotten existed. I made the call from a burner while 3 agencies listened. A woman answered on the second ring. I said, I never smelled smoke. Silence. Then, what do you want? My mother left me a bill she never paid. Another silence. Longer. Who taught you that line? She didn't die soon enough to keep all her secrets. That, apparently, was good enough. We got the meat 40 minutes later. Not with Mara, with someone above her. Tulsa. Abandoned freight exchange near the river. Thursday. 20 p.m. Tessa Greer smiled for the first time since I met her. It was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of a predator realizing the brush in front of her had finally moved the right way. The day of the meet, Daniel asked to speak with me alone. Tessa nearly refused. Then she saw my face and decided emotional instability might as well be scheduled if it was going to happen anyway. We sat in a bare room with plastic chairs and one buzzing light overhead like every confession in America has to be witnessed by bad electricity. He had my wedding ring in his palm. I had taken it off the night Danny showed me my mother's photo. He must have found it in the townhouse bathroom cup and kept it. He didn't offer it back. He just held it like evidence from a crime both of us had committed in different ways. If anything goes wrong tonight, he said, there are things I need you to know before other people start giving you their clean versions. I almost told him it was late for truth. Instead I said, go. He drew a breath. I was ordered 3 times over the years to intensify pressure on you, search warrants through back channels, surveillance expansion, financial squeeze. The kind of tactics that make ordinary people break in small ways before they even understand why life turned hostile. I blocked all 3. I said nothing. I changed reports. I buried indicators. I made myself professionally vulnerable because every path they wanted led to you bleeding for information you didn't have. The room was very still. You don't get points, I said at last. Not from me. I know. Then why tell me? Because if tonight goes bad, I don't want the last version of me in your head to be the thinnest one. That sentence almost broke something in me, which made me angry enough to survive it. You should have told me the first year. Yes. The second. Yes. The day you decided to marry me. His voice dropped. Yes. I looked at the ring in his hand. Tiny gold band, ordinary, not worth much money, worth an entire former life. Did you ever think my mother was watching us? I asked. His answer came fast. Yes. That chilled me in a way everything else had not. How often? Enough. I leaned back slowly. So somewhere in all those years, farmers market Saturdays, our anniversary at the lake house, the Tuesday we painted the guest room and got half the trim wrong, the night I held his face and promised him we would survive, whatever stress his job was causing, some unseen eye linked to my mother, might have known exactly where I stood and what I had built without her. That made what came next feel less like bait and more like inheritance. Tulsa wore heat strangely that night, all warm air above cold concrete, as if the city itself couldn't decide what season it was in. The freight exchange sat near the river like an old bruise, rusted corrugated walls, shattered office windows, weeds pushing through the lot. I arrived in a dented sedan with a burner phone, the ceramic wafer, and a microphone hidden in the seam of my jacket. Every law enforcement instinct within 100 yards was spread around me in layers I could not see. I was alone only in the theatrical sense. A black SUV rolled in 3 minutes late, 1 driver, 1 rear passenger, not Mara Quill. A woman stepped out wearing a sand-colored coat despite the heat, mid-50s. Elegant in that severe, expensive way people get when softness has become useless to them. Dark hair threaded with silver, a blue silk scarf at the throat. My body knew before my mind said it. My mother. She did not rush. She looked at me the way people look at houses they once lived in and are measuring for changes. Lena, she said. I had imagined this moment in 100 impossible versions over the years without ever knowing it. In some, I screamed. In some, I hit her. In some, I collapsed. In reality, my voice came out calm enough to scare me. You don't get to say my name like you earned it. Something flickered in her face. Not shame. Not quite. Recognition, maybe, of opposition as bloodline. You have my mouth, she said. That line would work better if you had been dead. She almost smiled. Almost. There was my face again, improved by cruelty. Your husband taught you composure, she said. There are several people in my life who taught me not to trust appearances. She looked past me, not visibly scanning, but feeling the edges of the place. She had done this too long to be sloppy. You brought it? She asked. I held up the wafer between 2 fingers. You staged your death, let strangers raise me on casseroles and condolences, let the government camp in my marriage, and you think you start with business? Her gaze sharpened. I start with what keeps us both alive. Us. There it was, the most insulting pronoun in the English language. I took 1 step closer. You don't have an us. The driver remained by the SUV, one hand near his jacket. My earpiece stayed silent. They wanted more. Higher admission, stronger linkage. My mother's eyes moved over me with clinical precision. You look tired. I work for a living. Sharp tongue. Your father hated that. My father buried himself in bourbon and debt after your funeral. That landed. Good. I wanted marks. You don't know what that funeral bought you, she said. Tell me. No. Of course not. Mothers like mine apparently still liked control more than reunion. She lifted one hand. Give me the wafer. No. A breeze moved the scarf. Memory hit like a blade, her knotting that same blue silk at the mirror while I sat on the toilet lid brushing a doll's hair, her humming under her breath, her telling me not to slouch, baby. The world already leans enough. The tenderness of old memory beside present ruin nearly made me lose focus. Nearly, I said. The note said if you failed me, I should end this. For the first time, something real cracked her mask. Did it? Yes. She took half a breath too late. I wrote that when there were still versions of this where I could come back. I laughed softly. And yet you never did. Because coming back would have put a target on you. Instead, you left one there. Silence. She understood then that I knew more than she wanted. Daniel told you too much, she said. I felt, rather than heard, the shift in the perimeter. Names passing in low voices, ready positions tightening. My husband has a name because I gave him one, I said. You forfeited that right with yours. Her gaze hardened on that word. Husband. A lot moved inside her eyes at once. Calculation. Contempt. Maybe, buried very deep, grief for a road she had once been too ambitious or afraid to take. He was never going to keep you, she said. That did it. Not because I still believed marriage was something simple or safe, because only she would say keep, as if love were a possession line on a shipping form. I stepped closer still, close enough to see the fine powder texture at her jaw, the tiny scar at her hairline from the can opener accident when I was 8. Proof that monsters can carry domestic details. You don't know what he kept me from, I said. But I do know what you made. The driver moved. So did half the night. Federal agents? Someone shouted. Everything detonated at once, lights flooding from two sides, boots on gravel, doors slamming, the driver reaching inside his jacket. My mother pivoting not away from danger but toward me. Toward me. That was the part I had not expected. She lunged with one hand out, not for the wafer but for my wrist, maybe to drag me, maybe to shield me, maybe because instinct survives morality. I never found out. Daniel came out of the dark faster than thought, hit her shoulder line, spun me clear, and then the driver fired once. Sound in open industrial space is monstrous. It slammed through my bones. Agents tackled the driver before the second shot. My mother hit the gravel on one knee, scarf half loose, Daniel in front of me, gun drawn, one arm barring me back. The scene froze into pieces. Tessa yelling commands, red-blue light washing over rust, Mara Quill nowhere because of course she would never stand where the risk actually lived. Is everyone hit? Somebody shouted. Negative. Daniel looked over his shoulder. Lena? I'm fine. My mother, on the ground, stared at him with a strange bitter wonder. So that's what you chose, she said. He kept his aim steady. Put your hands where I can see them. She laughed once. You think this is about obedience? No, he said. I think it's about endings. That line would have sounded rehearsed from anyone else. From him it sounded exhausted. She slowly raised her hands. Agents swarmed. Zip ties. Commands. The driver bleeding from a temple wound. Floodlights turning every face too bright. Tessa Grier reached my mother first, pulled her up, and read charges in a voice flat enough to sand steel. Conspiracy, smuggling, unlawful acquisition of restricted technology, fraud, obstruction, identity falsification. Enough counts to build a second life inside prison walls. My mother listened as if hearing weather. Then she turned her head and looked only at me, not at the agents. Not at Daniel. Mais, did you ever smell smoke? She asked. I understood then. The note, the phrase, the code between us and around us. Fire as story, as cover, as severing device. And because I was finished letting her author the language, I answered in plain truth. No, I said, I smelled gasoline. That changed everything. Danny later said the expression on my mother's face in that instant saved them 6 months of evidentiary work. She had not known what part of the old scene I remembered. She had not known the cover fire story had failed in me all along, down at the sensory level where children store the details adults wish they didn't. Gasoline, not faulty wiring, not accident, deliberate ignition. She closed her eyes once. Tiny motion. Total collapse. Then she opened them and finally looked her age. Take her, Tessa said. They did. And just like that, the woman I had buried at 12 and found at 34 was being loaded into a federal vehicle under floodlights. Still elegant, still dangerous, no longer mythical. The payoff should have felt clean. It didn't. Truth never lands clean. It lands heavy, then keeps ringing. The next 48 hours were reports, debriefs, chain of custody confirmations, emergency injunctions against shell holdings, and a parade of officials saying some version of excellent work, as if that phrase belonged anywhere near a daughter identifying her mother in a freight yard after 22 years. Mara Quill was caught trying to cross into Arkansas under a dental equipment sales alias. The driver rolled within 16 hours. The ceramic routes led to 3 more seizures. And buried in the digital debris of my mother's network, analysts found something Daniel had never known existed, a private archive of unsent messages addressed to me across 14 years. Not one had been sent. Not because she couldn't, because she chose not to. I did not read them. Maybe I will one day. Maybe I won't. Some closures are just new doorways into rot. 3 weeks later, the city looked offensively normal. School buses, sidewalk chalk, people arguing over avocados at the grocery store like no one's mother had just been indicted as a logistics mastermind. I moved back into our townhouse first because practicality beat symbolism, and second because I refused to let every lie evict me from my own kitchen. Daniel did not come with me. He rented a furnished apartment 15 minutes away and sent one text. "I'll stay gone until you decide what gone means." There it was again, not asking for forgiveness, not pretending space was noble, just leaving me the decision he should have honored years earlier. The agency suspended him pending internal review. Then came the more interesting part. Once the operation files were fully opened, it became clear how many times he had obstructed aggressive moves against me. Enough to save me. Enough to damage his career. Enough that the government's clean moral edges started looking very negotiable under direct light. Tessa Greer visited once with final papers and an apology so formal it nearly qualified as art. No charges, no continuing exposure. Protective designation lifted at my request. Compensation forms enclosed for involuntary disruption, as if a check could itemize betrayal. Before she left, she stood in my kitchen under the pendant light Evan Daniel had installed, crooked the first time and fixed only after I mocked him for a week. She said, "For what it's worth, he was the only person in this chain who never treated you like an object." I leaned against the counter. "That is an embarrassingly low standard." Her mouth twitched. "It is. Did you know he'd fallen in love with me? By year 2, everyone did. That should have comforted me. It didn't. Then why did nobody stop it? Because institutions are cowards when people still produce results." There was the truest thing anyone in government had said to me. After she left, I sat alone for a long time with that sentence. Institutions are cowards when people still produce results. Marriages can be too. It took Daniel another month before I agreed to see him. Not at home. At a coffee shop near the botanical garden where there would be too many witnesses for either of us to perform mythology. He arrived early. Of course he did. Navy sweater, no ring. Same hands, same eyes, different gravity. For a second I saw the man who used to wait up when I worked night shift, heating soup at 2 a.m., because he said insomnia was improved by shared sodium. Then I saw everything layered over it. The conference in Chicago. The reports. The withheld truths. The way both versions lived in one body and demanded I judge the whole. He stood when I sat. "Hi," he said. "Don't ruin this with soft openers." He nodded. "Fair." We got coffee. We sat outside. Wind moved leaves across the patio in little urgent skitters. "I'm resigning," he said. That was not where I expected him to start. "From the agency?" "Yes. Because of me? Because I built a life that can't survive more secrets presented as service." I watched him for a moment. "That sounds almost wise." "It's expensive wisdom." There was that dry tone again. It hurt less now, or maybe differently. He told me internal affairs had offered him a narrowed desk role if he kept quiet about certain structural failures. He declined. He told me he had enough evidence of case mismanagement to force a cleaner separation if they pushed. He told me none of that was a bid for sympathy, only context in case I heard things later. Then he reached into his coat pocket and set a sealed envelope on the table between us. "No hidden reports," he said. "No tricks. Just a written timeline of every major lie I told, every point where I should have told you the truth, and every action I took that affected you without your consent." I stared at the envelope. "That is either the most respectful or most horrifying thing you've ever done." "Probably both." I took it. "Why now?" I asked. "Because last time I kept the truth in my own custody, I almost lost the right to speak to you at all." That one went in deep. I looked at him. Really looked. Daniel Vale, Evan Sloan, the man who entered my life under orders and stayed under his own ruin. The man who lied daily and yet, somehow, also stood between me and people who would have crushed me to solve their case faster. Love does not become moral because it is sacrificial, but neither does betrayal become simple because it contains love. That was the hardest part. Simple things are easy to leave, complicated things get under the skin. "I don't forgive you," I said. "I know. I may never trust the first version of any answer you give me again. I know." And I stopped, because what came next was ugly in its honesty. I still missed him. Not the fiction, not the cover story, him. The actual man who remembered I hated cilantro and loved old train stations and got quiet when he was scared because he thought silence was the least harmful form of damage. His eyes changed when I couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't help me. That restraint, more than any apology, is what made me stay in my chair. "I'm not asking to come home," he said. "Good. I'm asking whether there is any form of future where I can tell the truth long enough for you to decide, with full information, if you want me in it. There are offers that sound romantic. That one didn't. It sounded administrative, earned, almost unbearably adult, which is exactly why I believed it. Maybe not fully, but enough." I took a breath and heard my mother's old world, his old world, my old world all cracking somewhere behind it. "One dinner," I said. "Public place. No softened timelines. No omissions because you think they protect me. One lie by withholding, and we are done." He closed his eyes for half a second, not in pain. In relief so sharp it almost looked like grief. "One dinner," he said. "That was 10 months ago. This is not the part where I tell you everything healed because healing is for movies and scars are for people. What happened is smaller and harder." He resigned. Officially, messily, he now consults on corporate security under his legal name, Daniel Vale, which still feels strange on some mornings when he's standing in my kitchen wearing my old Cardinals t-shirt and arguing with the coffee grinder. Yes, my kitchen. No, it did not happen fast. He did not move back in after one dinner or 3 or 10. He moved back in after months of documents, ugly conversations, therapy, disclosed files, passwords surrendered without theatrics. And one night, when I woke from a dream about blue silk and gasoline, and found him sitting on the bedroom floor across the hall because he had heard me cry out, and did not assume he was invited closer, that mattered. Trust did not return like light. It returned like physical therapy, repetition, pain, tiny humiliating gains, daily proof. As for my mother, she took a plea only after the prosecutors built a wall high enough that vanity could no longer climb it. She admitted to fraud, conspiracy, and operational orchestration across 14 years. She did not admit, in any emotional language, what she did to me. Of course she didn't. Women like Isabel Torres do not surrender authorship even in collapse. I attended one hearing, just one. She looked at me across the courtroom, thinner now, no scarf, no glamour left except posture. For a moment I saw the woman who packed my lunches in little square containers and tucked notes inside napkins. Then I saw the architect of every abandonment that followed. The judge asked whether any family wished to make a statement. I stood, the room waited. I said, "You taught people to hide danger inside ordinary things, cheap objects, familiar routes, everyday trust. That was your talent. But the thing you miscalculated was me. You thought being left behind would make me useful to you forever. It didn't. It made me the witness who ends you." Then I sat down, no speech, no trembling monologue, no moral essay, just the blade where it belonged. She never looked at me again. That, more than prison time, felt like the final correction. Some nights Daniel and I still sit in the kitchen after midnight with tea between us and the silence no longer feels like a trap. On the top shelf of the pantry, behind the flour canister, there is an old evidence bag I was legally allowed to keep after the case closed. Inside it is an empty black eyeliner tube with a silver cap, cracked at the seam where my superglue changed the course of half a dozen lives. We should probably throw it out. We never do. Maybe because it reminds us how close Fury lives to accident. Maybe because it reminds him that secrets always leak through ordinary objects. Maybe because it reminds me that intuition is not the same as truth, but neither is it nothing. Or maybe because in the ugliest possible way, that cheap little tube was the first thing in years that finally broke the lie open. If this story hit you anywhere painful, tell me below. Would you have glued the eyeliner shut too, and after all that, would you ever let him come home?